is working on an Android phone. Alright, so quick look at what happens if you build native applications. So now when I say native applications, there's a little assumption, and that assumption is that this is even recommended also by the Android developers website itself, and that is you can't actually build a full scale or a full blown application in C or C++. You will have to ultimately embed the C or C++ code which you have built inside an outer Java application. So that is the basic idea, as you can see in this diagram. So what typically happens is, now you can imagine that we have two kinds of source codes. So on one side we have Java source code, and on the other we have maybe C or C++ source code. So typically what happens is, when you have a Java program or you have an application which is built in Java and then it has some part of its code in C or C++, then typically the C or C++ code will have to be compiled into a library, and then typically a dynamic link library, and then that library is linked to the Java application. So that way when you actually depend or when you actually invoke the code which is written in C++, the code is already available and it is going to execute smoothly. So this is the basic concept as far as the runtime environment is concerned for native applications. All right, finally, we look at the runtime environment for Flex applications. So in this case, whenever you build a Flex application, you can think of it as containing two parts. As usual, there is a graphical layout and there is some backend code which is associated with the graphical layout. So the graphical layout in the case of Flex applications is built in a custom extension of XML that is called as MXML. And the programming is typically done in a language that is called as ActionScript. So any Flex application typically is a mix of MXML and ActionScript. So once you have a Flex application built, you deploy it on what is called as the Adobe Air runtime. So, well, of course, it is obvious that the Flash player is ultimately the runtime which executes your application, but it is basically packaged inside something called as the Adobe Air runtime. And remember that it is a Flex mobile application. What we are talking about here is a Flex mobile application. But once you install it on an Android phone, it has full access to system resources. In a sense, it's not like a web application. It doesn't run inside a browser, but it is in fact a native application. So it has full access to all the system resources. All right. So that's about the runtime environment. Now let's start with the first trail. So this is going to be a quick look at how to build a very simple application in Java. Right. So obviously for this we are going to need the Eclipse IDE and we need to have the JDK installed. So assuming all that is done, let's get started. So if you want to build an application in Java, so what is it that you need to do? Well, obviously your application must have at least one screen, and that screen might have some UI elements like buttons or checkboxes, radio buttons, and so on. So typically you can build a screen using drag and drop. Now that is one technique, but remember that the screen is typically represented with XML code in the backend. So if you're good at XML, you don't have to use drag and drop. You can directly start writing code in XML as well. Now the other thing is there is another little technical term here, that is the term is called views. So any UI element that you take in Android is just called a view. So for example, a button is a view, a checkbox is a view, a radio button is a view. Any graphical widget that you take is typically a view. All right, so yes, I think we are through here. All right, so let's move on to the next slide here. So what are we going to do? We are going to now build a we are going to look at a very simple calculator application. And of course, it's not a pretty complex application. It's a pretty simple application here. The idea is that we want to understand how to go about building a simple Java application at this point. And so in this case, we are just going to have an application with one screen in it. One activity, right? So what are the steps we are going to follow? First step, we are going to take an Android project. We are going to create a new Android project in Eclipse. Then we are going to look at the layout for this particular project. And obviously the layout, when I use the term layout, I'm talking of the screen. So this application is going to have just one screen, and that one screen, we'll design it the way we want. And of course, what is the next set of steps that are involved? There is, remember, as I mentioned, every activity has two aspects. One is the layout and then the backend code. So we have already talked about the layout. Now, inside the backend code, there are certain steps that we have to follow. And ahead, we'll look at what those steps are. All right. So quick look at the way the project structure is organized when you set up a new Java project. So in this, I mean, in this diagram, you see that here we have a bunch of inbuilt libraries. Okay, so this depends, I mean, the libraries will depend on what Android version you're targeting. For example, in this case, it is 2.2. It could have been 2.3 or 4.0, whatever the case may be. Then there is a subfolder that is called as SRC. So it is obvious that all the Java source files will be present in this particular folder. Then there is another folder that's called as gen, which contains some files which are generated automatically. All right, then here is the most critical file that is called as a APK. So it is short for Android package, and in fact this is the file that must be installed onto the phone. So that is the ultimate output of the entire application building process. Right. Then here is the layout. Remember, I was just talking of the layout. So the layout folder in fact contains one XML file for every screen that you find within this particular Android application. Okay, and then of course the famous manifest file which we discussed in quite a bit of detail previously. Right. So this is how a typical Android Java project is structured. Okay, so now here's a quick set of screenshots so that that you can look at, and because I mean, since we are short of time, so we already have the project ready, and we'll look at the project. But in the meantime, just a quick look at what are the steps involved. So you start off, I mean, you start Eclipse, then you click on File, New, and Project. Okay, so once the wizard pops up on the next screen, so click on Android Project. So once that is done, you specify a name for the project, and you pick what is called as the build target. I mean, which version of Android are you trying to target? 2.2, 2.3, 4.0, whatever the case may be. So in this case, we are targeting 2.2. Then make sure that you have a name for the application, and please specify a package name also for the application. That's it. So you don't have to do much apart from that. Okay. So now let's quickly look at this example in the emulator. All right. So. All right, so here is the application, and we have already, okay, so this is the screen. This is how it looks like. All right, so just a moment. Okay. All right, so you can see it's a pretty simple calculator that contains, for example, two input fields in which the user can type numbers and then click on add, subtract, or multiply. So it's pretty straightforward. Okay, so let's quickly look at this example live on the emulator. All right, so in this case, let's say put in say 12, 34. I try to add this. Okay, this result is shown here in what is called as a toast. So it's just a little pop-up window. Okay, here I hope you're able to see the result now. Let's try to multiply these numbers. Okay, so this is the calculator application running on what is called as the emulator. It's a virtual Android phone. So that is what is the emulator. This is the screen, the emulator that you're looking at. All right. So now back to the presentation. Just a moment. Okay, let me see. Okay. So now just a moment. Okay, I think we now need to look at the source code. Quick look at the source code of the calculator application. All right. So okay, so you can now see that all right, this is the screen. As I mentioned, the layout folder inside the res subfolder of the project contains an XML file for every screen within the application. Now, as I mentioned, this particular application contains just one screen, that is one activity, and let us have a look at what it looks like. Okay, here it is. So let's zoom in. There, it is pretty simple. It's in fact, it just contains two text fields and 3 buttons here. That's it, as simple as that. All right. So this is the graphical representation of the screen. But if you actually switch to what is called as the XML view, all right, you see this. So this here is the XML representation of the screen that you see here. So that is the basic idea. All right. So now corresponding to this screen, this is the backend Java code which is associated with that screen. So both these things put together, that is the screen here and the Java code, both these things put together become one single activity. And so for the purpose of this simple application, what we assume is that there is just one single activity. That's it. So you can see here. So this is basically a custom class that's called as calculator activity, and it extends the base class that is called as activity. And there is a on-click listener. So why do we need the on-click listener? It is for the button, because you might click on any of these buttons after having specified the two input values. So we need to find out which button has been clicked on, obviously. So we need to find out if you have clicked on the plus or the into, for example. Okay, so now if you observe the steps here, so we have two very important steps. Sorry, in fact, three important steps. So the first step is where we associate this Java code in the backend with the screen here. Okay, so that is the line here. If you observe, there is something called as a set content view, and then we have particularly mentioned main. In fact, that is the name of the layout file. So that way, this particular Java class is associated with this particular screen. So that is the idea. All right, so that's the importance of this line. The second step, we are going to register button listeners. So that way, we know which button is clicked at what point, right? And the third step, we are going to just obtain references to these two text fields. So that is the third step. Okay. So what we do is we register the button listeners that is in this code here, and we obtain the references to those two text fields. All right. So when the button is clicked, there is a function called, all right, there is a method called execop. So this execop is actually going to do the backend processing. So it is pretty straightforward. What we do is we find out, I mean, when the button is clicked and the runtime, the Java runtime calls this particular event handler, then we find out what button has been clicked, and we try to obtain the text property. The text property is the label which you see on the button. It can be, for example, the plus or the minus or the star. All right. So based on what symbol is found on the button which was clicked. So what we do here is pretty simple. We convert. Remember that the text fields here, the contents inside the text fields are strings. So those strings will have to be converted into integers. That's pretty obvious, right? So once we have these two integers, then we either add them or we subtract them or we multiply them. And after that, there is something called as a toast. As I mentioned previously, it's a little pop-up window that is displayed for, in this case, 5,000 milliseconds. It's 5,000 seconds. So this is pretty straightforward, right? So I hope this example has been a bit useful for you to understand how a Java application, a simple Java application, can be built and deployed onto the emulator. All right. So now let's spend just 2 minutes to have a look at the same application deployed onto a real Android phone. Okay. So let's okay. So there is a tool for people that might be interested. There is a tool called as the DDMS. So this particular tool helps you to observe the screen on a real Android phone. So in this case, we have a Sony Ericsson phone connected to this laptop. So let me start up the screen capture. Okay, as you observe here. So this is the screen of the phone. All right. So let's start up the application. Just hang on. Okay. So it's upside down. Yeah. All right. So here is the application. So let's now look at. All right, so if you observe here, this is the application already installed on the phone. So I'm going to start up this application right now. And if you observe, the screen looks pretty much the same as in the case of the emulator. Let me rotate the display. Hang on. All right, sorry. Okay, all right. So now if I click on the first text box, okay, so that's the first value, and then I click on the next text box. So that's the two text fields having the values. And now let's click on, say, the star. Okay, there's the result. That's 408. So you can see that we have successfully been able to install this application onto an Android phone. I mean, now we have obviously seen both the deployment scenarios. We have had a look at the application being deployed on the emulator, and also we have seen it being deployed on a real Android phone. Okay, all right. So that, I think, concludes the Java example. Let me see if we have missed something. All right, these are screenshots of the same, of the device that we have just seen. All right, so I think that's the end of trail 1. So we have successfully been able to understand how a simple Java application can be built for Android. Okay, so now the next step, let's now look at a native application. Now, when I say native application, as I mentioned, obviously the wrapper application, I mean the main application is going to be built in Java, but there are going to be certain pieces of the application which are going to be built, in this case C, but obviously it could also have been C++. All right, so what is it? I mean, what are the prerequisites for this particular application that we are going to look at now? We obviously still need to have Eclipse, and we still need to have the JDK already installed. All right, so let's move on. So in this case, here's a few notes which I have actually obtained from the Android developer website. So what exactly do we mean by native applications for Android? So the point is that you can actually build certain pieces of code that I mean, you might want to write in C or C++ for certain reasons. Now those reasons may, I mean, it's entirely dependent on the situation. There's no hard and fast rule, but it is entirely a judgment that is left to the developer. So the point is, I mean, Java is definitely a powerful programming language, no doubt about that, but there are certain scenarios in which maybe you already have some libraries, or you already have some code that is built in C or C++, and it's pretty stable. So the point is, why would we want to port it over into Java and then try to introduce bugs into the application? We don't want to do that, right? So the point is, you can actually take the C or C++ code which you already have, and then, you know, integrate it into an Android application. So that way you actually can reuse the code which is already well built and well tested, right? So the point is that typically any component that is built in native code is usually embedded inside a Java application. So that's the point. So the point is that just because, I mean, let's not be under the assumption that just because you have built the application using native code, then it's going to be, you know, it's going to give you a performance boost. That is not the case. In fact, it might also slow down the application. So it entirely depends. It entirely depends. All right. Okay. So let's now move on to this